I'm Connor Rebush, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. I am Connor Rebush. With me is Patrick Wyman, and UFC 211. We had high expectations, aside from a couple of low points, which I think were generally foreseeable. It delivered on action, on exciting matchups, on fights that mean something. But Pat, first order of business, I went 3-9 on picks at this event. Which is terrible, obviously. And I know that you did. I know you didn't make picks for the entire card, but you did at least a little better than me because you were wise enough to put your faith in Joanna Champion, and I was not. And I'm not worthy. So first order of business is that you're going to be promoted to host. You're going to take over all of the main duties of running the show. And then, unfortunately for you, second order of business is we're canceling the podcast. Because we can't pick all the fights correctly all the time. What the hell's the point, Pat?
Yeah. That Connor here, you are referring, of course, to one very disappointed gentleman who is very angry that our picks were not perfect.
If you listen to an hour-long podcast for like 2.5 collective minutes of predictions, then I don't know what to tell you. It's not about that.
Yeah, this is like you and I are both very into the process of doing this, and we try to. It's about the analysis, not the final outcome. Like all you can try and do, and frankly, this matters if you're picking fights too. You need to have a sound underlying process. Like you're trying to have a replicable way that you go about doing your business, rather than just making random ass picks.
Of course, the two are interconnected, right? There's a reason we do make picks, because part of talking about a fight beforehand is to make a prediction at the end of your discussion. And, it helps to understand how the fight might play out. But really, it's like all of the various permutations, how the technique works, how the strategy could work. I'm much happier, for example, we will get to the fights, but I'm much happier that I said that this is the strategy that Jedrzejczyk will need to use to win, and she used that strategy. That makes me much happier than me spending 30 seconds picking the wrong fighter. So it is what it is. We appreciate all you guys who decided to come back. I know my picks weren't very good over the weekend, but some of you at least, I'm sure, will listen to this episode, and we do appreciate having you here. Let's go ahead and jump into the card. UFC 211 was very fun. It had a bit of a lull, I guess, after the prelims. The prelims were amazing. Action-wise, the prelims were out of this world. And then the main card had a couple of slow spots. Of course, the middleweights, But we knew it was going to be one of the slower fights. We knew that in advance.
Dave Branch going to Dave Branch, man.
Yeah, what can you do? Let's talk about the main event, though. Junior Dos Santos took on Stipe Miocic. He beat him once before, took a lot of shots once before. Starting to look like he may not have that ability any longer, but Stipe Miocic also, I think, has made some improvements that we did not give him credit for, that are sort of like not necessarily even technical improvements, but just, I think, his feel in the fight. What's your read on what Stipe did to get Junior out of there in the first round?
So I think we did give Stipe plenty of credit for the improvements that he's made. Like I wrote an entire article about Stipe's improved pressure game, and I think that our read of the fight was correct. I don't think we underestimated Stipe's improvements. I think we overestimated Junior's improvements. I think we overestimated his comfort in terms of sticking and moving. I think we overestimated the improvements in his footwork. We overestimated the urgency that he felt when he got his back to the fence and his ability to escape there. Like based on one fight, frankly, based on the Rothwell fight.
I'm going to disagree slightly.
That's my read. That was how I thought about it.
Yeah, I don't think that's unfair. I think some people were saying that, that he reverted after the Rothwell fight, that and some people are saying that he never really improved that much at all. And
I don't think that's true.
Yeah, well, like the great fighting Buddha that I am, I'm going to take the middle way and say that he did make some improvements, but that they also were allowed to flourish more because of the fact that he was fighting Ben Rothwell. I think the big thing for Junior, like in the article I put out before the event, my main thing was talking about awareness. Like that was the big thing, is that Junior was suddenly aware that it was not a good idea to just willingly stand with his back to the fence. So when he felt it coming up behind him, and first of all, he knew when it was coming up behind him. Junior used to be in fights where he would be surprised by the fence hitting his back. That didn't happen against Rothwell, and I don't think it happened in this fight. And I do think he showed a lot more urgency in this fight than he did in the first one, getting his back away from the fence for like the first 3 times that it happened. But it happened like a half dozen times in very quick succession, which speaks to how much better and how much more aggressive Miocic has become as a pressure fighter. But it also speaks to something that we did mention last week in the show, which is that Junior's technique for cagecraft still needs development. And I was hoping in this fight that he would continue to add a couple more techniques. Like I talked about stepping into your opponent. I talked about getting
you got to
low.
be willing to be proactive with your clinching.
Yeah. Yeah.
If your opponent is going to pressure you like that, you have to be willing and able to clinch on your terms to take that away from your opponent.
Yeah.
So I disagree with you a bit, because I do think Junior reverted. Not entirely. He didn't go back to being the guy that he was in 2013 and 2014, but that sense of urgency was there every single time Rothwell backed him up. That sense of urgency was not there after the first few times Miocic did. And when they got back to open space, the difference is in the Rothwell fight, Junior was immediately jabbing, immediately moving, immediately trying to keep it there. This time, it was like he was waiting for Stipe to pressure him again. So he would get off the fence, get back to open space, and then he would do very little while Stipe stayed on him. There was not a layered approach in terms of enforcing distance when he got back to distance.
Yeah, I can agree with that. He was not as active with his shots, although I think it's worth remembering that the Rothwell fight, he didn't look amazing in the first round. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. He took about 7 minutes to warm up in that fight.
Yeah, he did get backed into the fight quite a few times in the first round, probably about as many times over the course of the first round as he did against Miocic in the first 3 minutes. But again, I do think that speaks a lot more to the effect that Miocic's pressure and speed and closeness had on Junior compared to the sort of big sluggish bear that is Ben Rothwell. But
that's true, yeah. And the big thing that stands out to me when Miocic gets guys backed up now is I don't think his cage cutting footwork is way better. He's way better at keeping his opponent in front of him.
Yeah.
But when he gets guys backed up, his shot selection is just fantastic. He does a perfect job of walking guys into strikes, especially that right hand, and of finding angles to land as they're trying to get off the fence. So when a guy moves, Miocic does a great job of taking small angles, taking slight pivots, and throwing as he pivots to land across your jaw or behind your ear. He's throwing exactly the right shots at exactly the right time from exactly the right angles. He's really accurate with the way that he's placing them.
His accuracy has stood out to me as well. And some folks on Twitter were pointing out too, I think Andrew Pearson, who listens to the show, he pointed this out. I think our friend Phil McKenzie may have as well, that one of the big things is for Stipe is that he seems just a little more confident just knocking people out now. So his approach when he gets someone against the fence is different. Because in the first fight with Junior, there were a lot of moments when he would nail Dos Santos as he was backing up to the fence, as he was exiting from an exchange or whatever, and then he would immediately tie him up. He didn't give himself enough time to discover if Junior was hurt, and he didn't allow himself to follow up if that had been an option. And we don't see that anymore. We didn't see it against JDS. He didn't hurt, or rather against Overeem. He didn't hurt Overeem and get him to shell up and then look for a single leg. He prodded him with the jab and feinted and tried to figure out how to get around his defense with combinations. And in this fight, we didn't see him tie up once. He did not look for the punches landing as an opportunity to wrestle. He was happy to just keep landing punches. And I do think it's a small change. It's not really technical for me so much as it is big picture strategy, strategic thinking. But it's important for a guy who seems to have a lot of power, who, as you said, picks his shots very well and has excellent accuracy, and who doesn't need to wrestle people in the heavyweight division to beat them. I think, weirdly enough, everyone thinks they need to take JDS down, but especially after those caned fights, especially after the first Miocic fight, especially after the Overeem fight, all the wear and tear he's taken, I think it's probably a better idea to just corner him and try to knock him out.
That's the exact thing that people figured out with Anthony Pettis, you know? Like, and I think that there are a lot of similarities as different as their striking styles are. I think there are a lot of similarities between Dos Santos and Anthony Pettis.
Yeah, I agree.
Who both kind of came up around the same time and have vaulted into the limelight at about the same time in 2010, 2011, 2012, around that point. And who had games that were based on their opponent's fear. That was what allowed them to function correctly. Was they would hit, they were so fast and they hit so hard, and they were so dangerous with the way that they picked and chose their shots in open space. Like, the guys were just afraid of them. And when guys figured out that they didn't need to be afraid of them, that they weren't as dangerous backing up, that they didn't have a lot of options against the fence, that they didn't have a lot of tools for enforcing that fear, then suddenly they looked really beatable and have never really figured out how to get around that. It's not like a given that they won't, but both of these dudes now are veterans, you know, like Dos Santos has been fighting for 11 years. Mm-hmm. Pettis has been fighting for a decade. Like, they could still get better. There's still room for them to do that. But at this point, it seems to me that theirs are games that the broader arc of MMA has passed by.
Yeah, I think they have gotten better, both guys. Like, I thought, I rewatched Pettis Holloway. Anthony's defense looked a lot better in the first round. He used his jab a lot more, and then of course Junior had the fight with Ben Rothwell. You know, like, I think, but for guys who've been fighting that long, it's going to be always be more smaller, more subtle changes. It's hard to make those big leaps and redesign your game after getting comfortable with it for such a long time. And so for Junior, when we see him like backed up against the fence and he's standing up tall, his knees aren't bent, he's not braced for a shot, he's trying to get away even though the guy is already like just 2 feet away in front of him and he's got no more space, he has to skirt along the fence, and he doesn't pivot, he just does those long side steps, you know. And I think that was an issue in the Rothwell fight too. Like, in the piece I did, I was like, I want to see Junior pivoting more. I want to see him, when he gets cornered, I want to see him turn his foot and then step out to the side in a nice tight angle rather than trying to follow the fence, because that's going to be harder against Miocic. We see all those things. Like, how
there were reasons to think that he could do that against Rothwell, because when he had a little bit more space, he was pivoting. Like, he was doing that.
Yeah, he wasn't doing it when he was cornered, though. That was the big thing for me. His footwork when he was cornered was like Condit's footwork against Nick Diaz, where he would like step out and turn his back to get away, or like what Overeem tried to do a bit against Miocic. And that stuff kind of worries me. But I think we also thought like it was going to be a tough fight, and Junior could take those shots necessary to get his strategy going, and to get Miocic a little tired. And I just don't think he can do that anymore. And without that, he's going to have to make big technical improvements to hang with like the top 3 guys in the division. And I don't know if he can.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I don't know what the answer to that is, but I don't feel like the signs are good. The only thing that's going to keep Dos Santos as a top 5 heavyweight is the fact that there aren't that many young guys coming up to take his place. Yeah. That's the big difference between heavyweight and lightweight or featherweight or welterweight, is your margin for error is much larger, because there isn't a whole crop of young, hungry lions out there nipping at the heels of the top 10. So like, whenever somebody slips off, there's somebody ready to take their place. You know, aside from Ngannou and Derek Lewis, like, what you see is what you get at heavyweight.
If Maynard and Shelby are cruel, they'll probably like feed Junior to Francis Ngannou next or something like that, just to capitalize on the fact that he's already lost a fight and he feels shitty about it.
Who is Ngannou fighting? He's fighting somebody that, God, I'm pretty sure he has one booked. Didn't they just book him in one?
They might have.
Derek
Lewis has a fight coming up. That's funny. Phil McKenzie said on Twitter, "It feels like we'll probably finally concede that Miocic is one of the best heavyweights of all time, and then Derek Lewis will knock him out just to make us feel like idiots." Yeah, that's heavyweight.
Yeah, seriously. Like oh my God.
With just like,
I'm ready to crown Stipe. I want to crown him.
You want to, but you got to wait, right? But if he gets that 3rd consecutive UFC title defense, like, that's the world record, which is crazy enough as it is that no one in UFC heavyweight history, the oldest UFC division, has ever defended the belt more than twice in a row. But Miocic now has tied for the record, so, which is more than anyone expected him to do 2 years ago. So he's looking good.
I want to talk about this real quick. Like, let's talk about Miocic because he's now knocked out 5 guys in a row.
Yeah.
Like, devastatingly. I mean, for a guy that we didn't think was that big of a puncher, he's now knocked out 5 guys in a row. He knocked out the ridiculously tough Fabricio Verdum. He knocked out the ridiculously tough Junior Dos Santos.
Yeah.
He knocked out the somewhat more fragile Alistair Overeem and Andrei Arlovsky. But he has just been fucking sleeping dudes. And I feel like, you know, we may have – this may have been construed as a knock. I don't think we meant it as such, but that he's kind of a jack of all trades and not really a master of any.
Yeah, I think like a big reason for that success is that he's being less of a jack of all trades.
Yeah.
Like he's just being more of a fucking puncher.
Yeah. And an aggressive one too.
Yeah.
Like he's walking dudes down, getting them close to the fence, and then he's picking and choosing really beautiful shots. Like there was a sequence against Overeem that I gift from my Washington Post article last week where he triples up on a left hook, goes to the body, comes back up over the top. Like it's just these are gorgeous sequences, man. And like even if he's not finishing guys right away, like the best part about this, I guess, is that it's a replicable game. That if he doesn't finish somebody in the first round like he has his last few opponents, he can do this in the second round, in the third round, in the fourth round, and in the fifth round, and it's going to work every time, you know?
Yeah,
like, it doesn't mean he's not going to get hit, but...
Yeah, the defense, I think, still needs work. I think it probably will improve with time, but, like, who else is going to be able to capitalize on that, even the way that, like, Overeem did, or the way that Junior did? Like, who else is in this division? Maybe Francis Ngannou can counterpunch like that. We don't know yet. And then maybe Cain Velasquez can pressure well enough to stop Miocic from doing it. We don't know that either, like, at this point. Who else
I don't think Velasquez wants to be in the pocket with Stipe Miocic. If Verdum could light him up in the pocket, I'm just seeing all of the – and granted, Velasquez looked better at that than he did in his last fight than he did against Verdum. But, like, in the pocket, I take Miocic. I think Miocic is a way better pocket puncher. He's longer. He takes better angles in the pocket. He can set a distance. Like I think I would actually pick him in that fight.
Yeah, I just want it to be known that I never doubted Miocic for a second, and hashtag Ohio strong.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, man. And like he's got room to get better. He's got a game that's built to last into his late 30s. Like there's nothing unsustainable about this.
Yeah, maybe he's kind of like like Jimmy Rivera, or there are other fighters I'm sure we could think of, but fighters who started as jacks of all trades, who then just started knocking people out and hurting them with punches. We've seen it with a few guys, where like they'll take the proper MMA approach and learn to do everything, and then it takes them a while, but then they discover that their game is more focused than that. Like he's kind of becoming a specialist before our eyes. I think that's what we're seeing, and it's fun to watch.
Dude, I mean, nothing but respect for Stipe. I always feel bad because I feel like we've consistently underestimated him.
Yeah, I think so.
And, like, I don't – it's not like we've ever thought that he's a bad fighter or anything like that. But I just think it has taken us a long time to fully grasp how good he actually is.
Yeah, I mean, I've had my eye on Miocic. Like, I remember very distinctly watching his fight with Shane Del Rosario. I'd seen 2 UFC fights before that, and I was watching with my friend, and I was like, oh – this is a guy to watch. You know, like I think he's got potential. But I did not think that he would get himself to the title. And I didn't think that he would develop a game that was good enough to match the record for defenses. Like I thought that was probably he was maybe get 1 defense and then be out of there. Nope. He's better than I thought. And so we got to give him credit for that. He has developed a new focused game. He looks more dangerous than ever. And he's charismatic too, man. Like, they need to promote this dude. Like, you now have a heavyweight champion who is matching the record, who looks poised to break it with the state of the heavyweight division right now. He sounds like Stone Cold Steve Austin smoked 5,000 cigarettes at once, and you're not promoting him?
He's a literal firefighter, man. That's the most trusted profession in America.
He saves lives and endangers them in the cage. So come on.
Yeah, I mean, I think I described him in the piece that I wrote for Deadspin last week as a publicist's dream, and he is a publicist's dream. Like that's, I mean, if you go out there and you try to push that guy, that's a guy who can be pushed.
I think so.
Like you should be able to.
Yeah, man. Oh well, who knows? Let those fighters do the heavy lifting. That's the UFC model. Doesn't look like it's changing anytime soon. Let's take a break, Pat. When we come back, we'll talk about Jedrzejczyk versus Andrade. I will grovel for 5 minutes for daring to question the queen of strawweight. and then we will move on to the rest of the card after giving that fight the full treatment that I think it deserves after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. And welcome back to Heavy Hands. Let's talk about the strawweight title fight. This was one of many on this card that I think everyone expected to be more competitive, and certainly me. I thought that it would be a lot closer. And we said very specifically last week, Pat, that like Jedrzejczyk would have to sort of not do some of the things that she has done in all of her fights to beat Andrade. She would have to kind of game plan and discipline herself to fight very specifically. And boy, oh boy, did she do it. She came in with the absolute perfect strategy. She nullified Andrade, who, by the way, looked tougher than we gave her credit for, did not have any issues with conditioning, looked absolutely in peak form, ready to take the title, but Jedrzejczyk took like a Greg Jackson approach. I'm sure Mike Brown has something to do with this at ATT, where we've talked about how Greg Jackson looks at the nodes in a fight, right? He'll be like, okay, we're standing at distance. This is a node. How many edges does it have? It has, you can throw a long-distance punch. You can throw a leg kick. You can shoot for a takedown. Okay, which one of those is most likely to lead to another position, another node, which is advantageous for us? That is what it looked like Jedrzejczyk had trained herself to do, or been trained to do for this fight. Because every single threat that Andrade brought to the table, Jedrzejczyk's game plan nullified it. And after nullifying it, she just picked her apart.
And nullified both in the short term and in the long term.
Yeah.
Right. That's the brilliance of this, is that it was a tactical and a strategic masterpiece. Yeah. So the right answer when you're standing at range with somebody who is much shorter than you, who's trying to get in on you, is you want to stick them at distance. Right. Okay. So the tools that Jedrzejczyk was using, low kicks, jabs, things of that nature, those were all suited to the tactical purpose of keeping Andrade at range. But they also served the strategic purpose of limiting Andrade's mobility and her cardio as the fight went on. So these were tools that she was applying with both tactical and strategic brilliance. They were exactly the right thing to do at the right time. Her timing was perfect. Something that we talked about in the last segment with, like, Junior Dos Santos would be well served to come off the fence and try to clinch proactively. And Jedrzejczyk did a gorgeous, fantastic job of that, right?
Yeah.
Like, so when Andrade would get close enough to get into the pocket, Jedrzejczyk would step in, grab a hold, and smother her. So when they were clinched up, when they were tied up, it was on Jedrzejczyk's terms, and we saw that play out over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. Like, that Andrade was not getting those nodes, the positions that she needed to lead to the positions that she wanted to be in. Jedrzejczyk was at least one or two steps ahead of her the entire fight.
Yeah. I think that this is. I'm doing an article on this fight, obviously, because I know it wasn't the back and forth fight that we expected. I see an awful lot of people saying that Jedrzejczyk's fights aren't fun, that she's boring, which to me is absurd. But I know it was more one-sided.
The dumbest fucking thing I ever heard in my life.
I know it was more one-sided than pretty much any of us thought it would be. We thought Jedrzejczyk would have to dig deep a little bit and fight back, and mostly. But you have to give her credit for turning an unpredictable, competitive, well prepared in terms of like athletic ability and stamina opponent into a punching bag. Like, that's not easy. And so every single thing that Andrade brought to the table, like, Jedrzejczyk knows that Andrade likes to flurry on the counter, and so she didn't commit to any long punches or combinations at range. She did not lead with combinations that would leave her exposed. I don't think she threw a combination at all until the second round, when she'd had Andrade, she'd gotten her read, and then started throwing 1-2s. She knew that Andrade was better, was more dangerous in the pocket with her punches, so she chose her weapons carefully: jabs, low kicks, high kicks to make her keep her hands at home or hurt her if she didn't. Everything was not in boxing range. She knew that Andrade came forward in straight lines, so that she kept that distance, and when Andrade did try to flurry, she had very good pivots and side steps to make Andrade miss, and she knew that rather than boxing with her in the pocket, she should tie her up and beat her up with elbows and knees. Like, every single thing she did, as you said, Pat, it served two purposes. It was both tactically and strategically perfect, and it just made Andrade look like 10% of the fighter that I expected her to be in that fight.
So this was something that we talked about with Andrade prior to and then after the Angela Hill fight, was that Andrade is essentially a swarmer, right? That she produces offense in bursts. Yeah. And she might go a while between bursts. It might be 15 seconds, 30 seconds, even 45 seconds, where she's not really doing a whole lot. And this is the very nature of her game. This is baked in to how she approaches fighting. It's not separable from what makes her good. So what you do if you want to beat a swarmer like that is you want to limit their opportunities to swarm. Yeah. You want to limit the nodal points, if we want to use Greg Jackson's terminology. You want to limit the points where she can do where she can produce offense. That's what Jedrzejczyk did so brilliantly here. It's not that Andrade stopped being dangerous. It's not that she wasn't doing the things that she's capable of doing. It's that Jedrzejczyk didn't give her chances to do it. So, like, we talked about this in the lead up to the fight, that one of the things that we thought Andrade does better than just about anybody is following you back to the source with her counters. So it's not that she plants her feet to throw back when you throw at her. She follows you in. She follows the punch back to it or kick back to its source. Yeah. Jedrzejczyk did, and that's how Andrade starts a lot of her flurries. So what starts as a following you back counter, with one or two punches, ends up being 8, 10, 12, 15, 20 punches at a time. Yeah. When she gets you back. Jedrzejczyk never let her get past that first one or two shots because she never stood in front of Andrade after throwing. So it was one shot, pivot out, back to open space. Two shots, pivot out, back to open space. Low kick, move. Low kick, move.
Or, one shot, Andrade is coming in faster than expected, step in, tie her up. Yeah, she exactly. Never allowed her to have the mid-range that Andrade prefers to land those big, devastating shots.
Yeah, I don't think Andrade got off more than 3 shots at a time the whole fight, and that is the truly, truly ridiculous thing about this.
The cleanest. She landed 2 punches that I can recall that were particularly clean. One, I think, does prove that Andrade hits pretty fucking hard. She put a gigantic mouse on Jedrzejczyk's forehead with the left hook in the first round, and then in round 3, she landed 1 shot immediately after being kicked in the face with the hardest high kick of the fight. And more caught Jedrzejczyk off balance with the right hand than really hurt her. But that was it. Like, those were her moments. One was in the very first minute of the fight, and one only happened because she's tough enough to let the champion just kick her in the mug and keep throwing punches. Jedrzejczyk did not give her any opportunities. Andrade took the opportunities, and Jedrzejczyk made it very difficult for her to take any more.
It's absurd. Like, it's hard to overstate what a perfect performance this was from Jedrzejczyk.
Go on. Sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I'm just getting excited here, but she's gotten better technically too. She didn't come into this fight and she didn't look just like old school Jedrzejczyk. Like, I think her kicks are getting harder. We never seen her throwing high kicks like that, but they were beautiful. Like, I hope we see some more of that. She was throwing full lead leg high kicks with no switch on the retreat, which is not easy to do.
That's something that you see a fair bit in like high level Muay Thai, but you almost never see in MMA, is somebody who can kick going backwards. And that goes to show just how fucking good Jedrzejczyk is.
Yeah, I think I kind of assumed her bringing the kicks back into her game was the final stage, but she has more levels of kicking technique that she hadn't revealed before this fight.
She's one of the very best clinch fighters in all of MMA. Yeah. She's probably the best range striker. I really think that that if you look at all of the aspects of her game, regardless of gender or weight class, I think from a technical perspective, she's the best technical striker in the UFC. That
you gonna trash man Jose Aldo like that, Pat?
I think she's more versatile than Aldo is. Frankly, I think that she can do more things. I think that Aldo may be better in a strict sense at 1 or 2 things, but I think Jedrzejczyk can do all of them. with equal facility and equal skill at an elite level. And I think she's the only person in the UFC who can say that. She can pressure, as she did to Jessica Penne and Carla Esparza. She can stick in the pocket and throw counter combinations like she did to Letourneau and Karolina Kowalkiewicz a whole bunch, and did a little bit here. She can play a stick and move outside fighter like she did here. I don't think there's anybody else who can do all of those things with the kind of skill that she can, delivering the kind of volume that she can, with the kind of technical skill that she does. That's my reasoned opinion on the matter.
You may be right. We'll talk about this later, Pat, about you disrespecting my boy Aldo like that. Not in front of the kids. We'll talk about this later. No, I think I think she's absolutely undeniably up there. Like, you don't have to put a gender label on it. She is easily among the very best strikers in MMA. And I think, like, you would say that, but it would be a lot harder to put her at like that number one slot or in contention for that number one slot before this fight. Like, punches were straighter, footwork was cleaner, everything made strategic sense, kicking form was better. I think defense was better. Like, she showed a little more head movement here. She didn't have to very much because she was mostly out of the pocket, but she was very aware with blocking as she was pivoting. Her head moved a few times when she needed it, when Andrade did close distance. Like, every single thing that makes her a good striker improved in this fight, and I think that's crazy.
I'll tell you real briefly why I put her over Aldo in this.
Yeah.
And it's because Jedrzejczyk puts herself more at risk. It's because she's less conservative. Aldo is a better defensive fighter by any metric. Aldo is the best defensive fighter in MMA history, and it's not especially competitive on that front. But the downside of that is that Aldo's fights end up often being relatively close, and there are a lot of fights where he just doesn't produce that much in the way of offense.
Yeah.
Like, he basically won the second Edgar fight with a jab and a right hand, which is extraordinary.
Yeah.
But it also limits how much he's actually producing. There is never any doubt when you go to the final bell of a Joanna Jedrzejczyk fight who won it. There's never any doubt when you look at a single round that she's fighting as to who won it. Like, even those first 2 rounds against Claudia Gadelha in their rematch, those were like the second round. There was an argument that Jedrzejczyk won that second round of that fight. The first round, even though she got dropped, she still outlanded Gadelha in that round. She still landed more strikes than her. That kind of replicability of process, that she is basically always going to put herself in position to win rounds, even when they're tough rounds for her.
Yeah.
That, I think, is what does it for me.
I guess eventually we need to see her fight Gadelha a third time, because Gadelha is the only person who has ever made a Jedrzejczyk fight in the UFC look remotely close. Like, there's never been any question with anybody else, you know?
It's got to be Valentina Shevchenko. We need to see them fight.
Eventually.
For the 125-pound belt.
Both go for that double championship? Both go for 125?
I think Shevchenko's going to lose to Nunes again. I think the size is just too substantial. And Nunes, because she's such a physical specimen, frankly, because she's so athletic and still has so much upside, I think we're going to see Nunes look even better the next time out. And Shevchenko, not that she's a bad fighter or anything like that, or that she can't improve, but because of the physical gap, she's so much shorter, she's so much less physically imposing, she's so much less explosive and athletically gifted, that the gap between how much better they can get is pretty substantial.
I'm looking forward to it. I think I don't know, man. I still am not sold on the idea that Nunes it can fight at pace for more than 2 rounds. Still not sold. And if she can't, then, and if she doesn't finish, I think she might need to knock Shevchenko out. And maybe her best route to do that is to get Shevchenko on the ground and beat her up from top position, which she is very, very good at. And we saw that Shevchenko can be a little vulnerable to that in her fight with Juliana Pena. But barring that, Nunes looked terrible in the 3rd round of her first fight with Shevchenko, right? She was completely gassed.
I suppose the question is, how much do you buy into, how much can she improve, I guess?
Yeah.
And I tend to think that there's still a lot of room for her to improve.
I think so too. Yeah, I think so too. She's a phenomenal athlete, and she has gotten better by massive strides since moving to the U.S. and becoming a full-time fighter. But who knows, man? It'll be a good fight. But eventually,
anyway, that's the fight I want to see. I want to see Shevchenko Jedrzejczyk for at 125 pounds.
Well, if Shevchenko loses, like, it's no skin off her teeth, because now that they're going to do 125, like, Shevchenko's perfect size for that division. She could just make a career there.
I think Shevchenko walks at like 135 to 140. She's not big at all.
We'll get like Valentina Shevchenko and Caitlin Chukagian, and I don't know. There are other options in bantamweight that would be better fits for flyweight, and there are a lot of fighters out there that are good fits.
There's a lot of talent at that division. Keep your eye on Agnieszka Niedowicz, who's another Pole, who's freaking fantastic, fights with a real nasty edge. She's coming up, but. Anyway, I think Joanna's going to be a 2-division champion. I think she's already the GOAT in women's MMA.
Oh, and, yeah, undeniably, man. Like, I want to say, like, there were a lot of things that made Andrade, like, you even thought, like, it wasn't, I know I was the fool who picked Andrade, but you certainly thought that she was going to be a bit dangerous for Joanna. Like, everybody who looked at this fight and looked at what Andrade can do, who knew that Joanna liked to stand and trade shots, everybody knew that Andrade had a lot of threats. For the champion, and she just took them all away, like, with ease.
Because what's so impressive about this is it's not a question of tools. We all knew that Jedrzejczyk probably had the tools to do this. It's a question of temperament.
Yeah,
and
discipline, man.
Can you step outside yourself in order to fight the kind of fight you need to give yourself the best chance of winning? Like, that's fighting against type in MMA is, I think, the most impressive feat that there is. Because it's an abrogation of self. It's giving up something fundamental about who you think you are in order to give yourself the best chance of winning. Like, that's a really stunning accomplishment. It's why I think, like, McGregor Diaz 2 is such a stunning fight. Like, it's why it's one of my favorite fights of all time, because it's sometimes you have to hold yourself back. You can't be who you want to be at all times in order to see the big picture, to win the big picture, to lose battles in order to win the war.
You have to, like, I know it's silly, like, fighters are always like, oh, I'm staying humble and stuff, but Joanna's talked about that a lot, and I do think it takes a great deal of humility to realize that, like, you by yourself just doing what you naturally want to do is not good enough to be the best. Like, eventually somebody else being themselves is going to come and make your natural fighting style look bad. And so she may be on her way to becoming one of our rare all-terrain fighters in MMA if she can continue to turn in performances like this, because she really did. Like, the discipline was insane. The temperament, the control was just phenomenal, and I thought it was beautiful to watch, man. I know it. I'm hoping for somebody to challenge Joanna one of these days, but she's getting people that should be able to challenge her, and they can't. They can't the way we expect them to, because she's that good. So before we wrap up here and move on to our next segment, why don't we very quickly touch on that welterweight fight between Demian Maia and Jorge Masvidal. It was 2 fights, all rolled into one, and Demian Maia's fight was slightly more meaningful to the judges at the end, and he won. It was a very, very close contest, with neither guy clearly taking it. The only round that was clear was Maia taking the first, and even in that, it was mostly back control without a ton of damage, and then Masvidal did a bunch of damage on the ground with strikes at the end. So even that wasn't very clear.
Yeah, it was basically exactly the fight that we thought it was going to be. That there was not a lot of mixed action.
Yeah.
It was basically, is Masvidal doing Masvidal things, or is Maia doing Maia things? And Maia got to do slightly more Maia things than Masvidal did, to crib a little. Like, this was basically our read of the fight beforehand, and I think our good friend Grabaka Hitman on Twitter tweeted exactly that like that was his considered technical analysis of the fight.
Yeah, can Maia do Maia things, or will Masvidal do Masvidal things?
Yeah, I mean, and that's basically how it played out. It wasn't real surprising in that regard. And I think that the dynamics of this fight were always pretty dang clear. I think we always had a good sense for what it was going to look like in practice. The only thing that I want to point to here is that I think Masvidal made 2 mistakes the whole fight, and they were both mistakes about when to separate. That in the third round, he let himself get a little too frisky with trying to land shots when Maia was in on a failed shot, when he was kind of under in that deep half trying to reshoot to a single leg, where Masvidal could have separated but decided to try and land like 1 or 2 more shots instead, and that's what allowed Maia. to finish the takedown. And then there was one situation like that in the first round that was where Masvidal wasn't quite as guaranteed to be able to escape, but he still, again, like tried to land one or two more shots, and that was basically it. Like, the two mistakes. That's all it took for Masvidal to lose himself the fight. And I don't think there's a better summation of what makes Demian Maia in 2017 so fucking good as two small mistakes, two tiny little mistakes, and that was all it took.
He is like the cartoon, the 50s action movie depiction of quicksand. Like, he really is. You dip one fucking toe into that quicksand and you're dead. Like, you need three other people to come with a vine to save you. I'm sure that Masvidal would have welcomed his corner throwing a vine to him when Maia had his back in the third round, because that was staying on top in that half guard. And by the way, the fact that Maia always turns half guard into a takedown is crazy. Like, he's so on another level with the consistency and skill of his grappling game. But it was exactly what Matt Brown did to Maia. When he seemed to have a moment where he might have made some headway in that fight in the third round, Matt Brown had one moment. He hit Maia. He put him on his back, or Maia, rolled to his back to avoid further damage. And he was like, okay, I can throw a few shots here from half guard before I separate. Because half guard's a good position for the top guy in MMA. It's one that a lot of people train to look for. You feel comfortable there. And you throw like three punches and then suddenly you're being taken down or your back is being taken. You don't get to do that against Maia, which is insane. Nobody else can make one phase of the game so poisonous for all of their opponents. Because Demian Maia said after that fight, Jorge Masvidal is the best jiu-jitsu fighter I've ever faced in the octagon. And Masvidal does have a very good ground game, and he's a very good wrestler. And he just could not afford to willingly play any of that phase against Demian Maia.
Yeah, what a low-key slight to Gunnar Nelson right there.
Yeah, I think he may have said he's one of, but, I don't know. Maybe he feels less inclined because, wasn't Gunnar talking some pretty mad shit before the fight with Maia?
I honestly don't remember.
I think it was maybe that Masvidal said he was going to beat the hell out of Maia, but Kavanaugh and Nelson were saying basically that they were going to out-grapple Demian Maia. Now, you don't say that.
How fucking funny is that in hindsight, man? You
don't say that about Demian Maia, man. You do not test this man's grappling game.
Good luck with that. We'll see how that goes. Yeah. But, yeah, I mean, I sincerely hope Maia gets the title shot. He deserves it. He's won 7 in a row. He's won, he had submitted 2 dudes before this who were incredibly hard to submit. Come on, man. Like, what more does he need to do? This is unbelievably impressive.
Yeah, and I think they'd be wise to make it a co-main, because I think that Maia Woodley will be probably a terrible fight, but
but if you're not going to give Demian Maia a title shot at this point after everything that he's done, what are we even doing here, man?
Yeah, what the fuck is the point, dude? He's earned it. 7 in a row against top guys: Gunnar Nelson, Carlos Condit, now Jorge Masvidal. There are other names in there too that I'm not remembering right now. Give the man a shot.
Yeah,
he's earned it. Plus, he's a sweetheart, man. Come on. He's like Junior Dos Santos. You can't not like Demian Maia as a person. It's like, I just reward him, okay? I know you're not going to – nobody wants to see Tyron Woodley's fights anyway at this point in time. So just make this fight. Maybe it'll be interesting. Who knows?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, why not? Make it a co-main, though. Put it under a Jedrzejczyk fight, please.
Yes.
Okay, let's take one more break, Pat. When we come back, we have a couple other fights to discuss, namely Frankie Edgar's domination of Yair Rodriguez. That one did not go the way we expected. And the banger with the disappointing ending between Eddie Alvarez and Dustin Poirier, Jason Knight's impressive victory over Chaz Skelly, and then probably a few words on James Vick and his knockout in the FX prelims as well. All of that after this break. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. And we are back. Frankie Edgar destroyed Yair Rodriguez at UFC 211. Absolutely destroyed him, with a little help from Yair Rodriguez's Cutman Tate, I believe, who, I will say, made a strange decision in treating a cut under Yair's eye rather than putting the end swell on the mouse that was closing his eye. But it may have honestly been for the best for Yair that he got stopped by the doctor and did not get to go the third round, because he was getting his ass handed to him by Frankie Edgar.
I mean, the Cutman thing, it's like trying to bail out the Titanic with with like a Play-Doh cup. You know, I mean, that wasn't going to get any better.
It's like you used a small bucket when you should have used a medium-sized bucket. Yeah, it's, you know, I mean, it may honestly, like, it may have been better for Rodriguez in the long run that the mouse was not treated, because otherwise the way it looked is, I mean, he had a chance with that knee bar, but the way it looked is that it was going to be at least 4 more minutes of pounding.
Yair Rodriguez had as much chance of finishing that knee bar as I have of finishing that knee bar. Like, I mean, this was a brutal shellacking. There is, oh my God, this just dude right under my window with the leaf blower. Come on, man. Come on. I'm trying to get into a rhythm here. Okay. So it was a pretty comprehensive shellacking. Looking back at it, so Rodriguez did not do that bad a job on his feet. Looking back at the first, 30, 35 seconds of each round, he didn't land much meaningful, but he was not getting badly destroyed in those exchanges. He ate one big counter combination right off the bat, like within the first 10 seconds of the fight. But otherwise, he actually did fairly decent. The problem was that he was totally unprepared to deal with the chain wrestling of Frankie Edgar.
Yeah.
He had, Rodriguez is a guy who is not bad against chain wrestling scenarios, but that also means that he gives up on opportunities to separate. Like he had a couple of chances to separate as Frankie was trying to reshoot, especially in the second round with that takedown. Yeah. And he was like, I can defend this. Oh wait, I'm down. He did at the last second. I think he knew Frankie was going to figure it, and so he tried to invert for the knee bar rather than just getting taken down. But I think for me, yeah, there's that. But the big problem for this, and I got to throw a little bit of shade at Yair Rodriguez's corner or his training camp, because it doesn't seem like he had the right preparation at all. I can't say for sure, but he had his head against the fence for substantial portions of this fight and played guard. That was the one inflection point of the fight right there.
Yeah, he was. I mean, getting taken down by Frankie Edgar, big whoop. It's going to happen. Like that is not anything to be embarrassed of. It's not something that you can say, okay, I failed because I didn't stop every single one of Frankie Edgar's takedowns. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That's not a failure. It's going to happen. But to get taken down and then play full guard for 4 minutes at a time, with your
hips pinned against the fence. Like, where do you think you're going there?
While being savagely beaten on the ground for the duration of that time. Like, you
never tried the wall walk.
You're being told very clearly that your guard is not going to work, that you're being beaten up. You have the exact position you would need to no longer play guard, and you don't go for it at all? That was a little confusing to me.
What the fuck, man?
I mean, inexperience, I guess. We can chalk it up to inexperience, but I think you also have to...
That's MMA 101. That's MMA in 2017 101. You never try to play guard with your hips pinned against the fence, because there's nowhere for your hips to go.
Yeah.
Like, with the fence there, your guard can work in open space when even at this point in MMA. You're like, when top control is drastically more effective than trying to work from your back. You can still work from your back in MMA if you have space for your hips to move. You don't have to be like smack dab in the middle of the cage, but you need to be close enough that you need to be far enough away from the fence that your hips are not going to get pinned in place with a simple turn.
Yeah.
So you don't need to worry about that. But but to sit with your back against the fence, or with your head pinned in place against the fence, and to never try to wall walk is an unforgivable sin.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, we knew that Yair was still a little raw around the edges. We know he's making improvements slowly. But honestly, this fight kind of gives me the feeling that he could improve a lot more quickly somewhere else. I don't have a lot of faith in Valley Flow striking, or wherever it is he's training these days, to give him, or maybe it's not fair to throw him under the bus. Maybe it's Yair is a crazy athlete, and we know how a lot of crazy athletes fight. They just don't develop the right technical game. Like, you need to have some limitations to keep yourself from becoming an Icarus sometimes. And so maybe that's just that Rodriguez is, but maybe he needed this fight to do it, you know. But it was not good. It was a bad performance from Rodriguez. You know what I mean? It wasn't just like Edgar. Edgar looked amazing, but it was also Rodriguez not making any of the decisions he needed to make to actually win this fight. And he got battered.
So. I mean, the good news is, because I do think that to some extent there were some unavoidable things about this. You're absolutely right. If you're fighting Frankie Edgar and you're at this stage of your career, you are going to get taken down. That's the point that was going to happen, and you were like, you don't need to rake yourself over the coals for that. But staying against the fence and trying to play guard is something that should have been beaten out of you within the first week of training for a high level fight. There's no reason to ever do that. With the knee bar, like, you've got to have the sense of when to give up on the knee bar and when to try to do something else well before you've eaten 6 or 8 punches to the dome. Like, you have to be, those are things that can be trained out of you. There was the point where he maybe could have separated when Edgar was in on the reshot. That's something that you could have worked on more in training. Shot selection at range was something that he could have worked on more. Footwork was something he could have worked on more. His footwork looked like it looked better than it had in the very early stages of his career, but it pretty clearly looks to me like his footwork has peaked. Like, he has not improved his footwork in about his last 2 fights. So,
who was even out there teaching really good footwork? Like, who are our top level boxing coaches? Because obviously, like, that's the sport I think you should turn to if you want someone to teach you good footwork, how to navigate a fighting area, and execute all the proper moves. Where are they? Because I feel like I talk about this all the time. Like, I know these guys are athletically capable of it. And maybe it's just that they have so many things to focus on, but I need to see more good footwork in MMA, man. Like, it's only the very best fighters that demonstrate what I would consider to be fairly fundamental footwork in a lot of instances. So, but I do want to say one thing really quickly about that knee bar attempt. Rodriguez, it was the best moment he had in the fight, and he adjusted pretty well. Like, he almost got in on it after failing the first time, after kind of threatening a heel hook. But I want to talk about the way that Frankie Edgar dealt with it, because Frankie does not get enough praise for how fucking good his top game is on the ground. And every single thing he did was, like, we talk about Frankie Edgar as a flowchart fighter who builds over the fight and who sort of like puts together the pieces of his tactics. And we got to see a really nice example of that on the ground, where Rodriguez is threatening his leg, so Frankie's in this kind of weird compromised position. Now, a lot of people would have gone crazy and started throwing punches, right? His leg is starting to be stretched out. He doesn't really have the angle necessary to get it out because Yair is going belly down, so he doesn't really have room to arc his leg or to turn his hips and escape. And so he made the exact right decision. He controlled Yair's head. He immediately went for his upper body and grabbed his arm and around his neck, like basically tried to get a seatbelt, even though he was a little too far away to get it, to prevent Rodriguez from pulling away with the leg and extending. And he worked from that position until Rodriguez tried to adjust, and the moment he tried to adjust, Edgar was ready for it. He immediately snatched his foot back and bent his leg again, got it out of Yair's hands, more or less, and then started to throw punches. He did not throw a single punch in that moment until he had his leg relatively safe, which to me, like, the beauty of good ground and pound, the beauty of good MMA groundwork is in using strikes to accomplish wrestling and jiu-jitsu goals and vice versa. The way that these things blend together to allow you to advance position or to escape submissions or whatever. There's a lot more opportunities in MMA, many more different permutations of how an exchange can play out. And like, that's the beauty of watching Frankie Edgar on the ground, is that every single thing fits together perfectly. Every single thing is the exact right response to what's being done to him. So I do think you're right. Like, Yair got close on that knee bar, but he had as much chance of finishing it as, I'll even downgrade it, as I would have had of finishing it, because Frankie Edgar had absolutely the perfect response to that and just looked like a monster in top position in this fight. Was absolutely impressive. Let's move on then. We'll try to touch relatively quickly on the last few fights we have to discuss, but we have to discuss Eddie Alvarez versus Dustin Poirier. I'll let you take this one away, Pat.
That fight looked basically exactly the way that I thought it would, except Poirier in the early going was a little sharper with his range work than I had expected. But it seems to me like, yeah, he has finally – he had talked before his last fight about how he wanted to brawl less, how he wanted to turn himself into a more technical and capable range striker. And it looked to me like those changes have now fully blossomed, that he has the tools to do that. The question with Poirier is always going to be whether he has the temperament to stick to them.
Yeah.
Which benefits us as viewers of a violent product, maybe not so much a benefit to him. But I thought that he would hurt Alvarez. He did hurt Alvarez. He almost finished Alvarez, but then he stuck around just a bit too long and got clipped, and that's how we ended up with him getting kneed right in the noggin illegally. I don't understand why that's a no contest. It should be a DQ.
Absolutely.
The last knee looked pretty intentional to me.
And the first knee was also illegal, which I think the reason that Herb Dean did not call it a no contest live is because he did not know that the new rule had not been adopted in Texas, which I know sucks. It's a really unfortunate situation, but that is what the law of the land is in Texas right now, that they have not ratified the new rule about the hand being down, and Herb didn't know that as the referee, when he should have. So he thought that only the second knee was illegal, which made it more plausible that it was unintentional, that Alvarez didn't know that Poirier's position had changed, but the first knee was thrown from an illegal position as well. So it should be a DQ. It should be... There should be no excuse for the UFC not to give Dustin Poirier his win bonus for that fucking awesome fight.
I mean, if they were just going to pay him his win bonus, I would feel less weird about it being a no contest. Like, it would still be wrong, but at least then he would be getting paid. But they're not going to pay him his win bonus.
Yeah.
So he doesn't have any choice but to appeal this, to try to get it changed into a DQ. Because otherwise he's gonna miss out on $60,000 or something like that. No, get your $60,000, man.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's talk about Poirier's improvements really quickly, because I do think he looked a lot better and more comfortable at range, and I do think his temperament was a little more used to it as well. Against Jim Miller, he fell into the brawling pretty easily. It didn't take long, and in this fight, he made it very, very difficult for Alvarez to hit him at range, which isn't where we probably thought Alvarez would have more of the advantage. And Poirier was on point with his kicks. I want to praise his defense, because I don't know if it's just awareness or what, but I don't think technically he's added new tools to his game. I think he's maybe just getting more comfortable. But he was a lot harder to hit in this fight than he ever has been before. He had a nice sort of cross-armed guard block, that kind of high elbow block that Firas Zahabi likes so much. He had some really nice slips. His angles looked good. Those are continuing to be an important part of his game that don't generally get talked about enough. But even when Alvarez hurt him and put him against the fence, he did not just start brawling with Eddie. He kind of did a bit of a Robbie Lawler impression. He let Eddie throw, tried to pick off his shots with his defense, tried to block and move his head and not be a static target, and then tried to land a hard, devastating counter as Alvarez was unloading. But he did not just trade punch for punch with him, which I think he might have done even one fight ago. So I think he deserves to be, kind of lauded for that, that he is actually making that change that I think most of us were unsure that he would be able to make.
It's going to give him a lot more longevity.
Yeah.
Because there are going to be points where he's going to be in there with guys I would say Justin Gaethje maybe at some point. That's a matchup that might get made down the road.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
can you imagine that matchup?
Towel me off, man. But so if he gets into that matchup, I think that's a fight that old Poirier, pure power puncher Poirier, I think that's a fight that he just gets his block knocked off and loses.
Yeah.
But advanced Poirier, who can stick and move behind a jab, who can crush you with low kicks, who can pick his spots for when to sit down on combinations, when to exchange, that is a much more viable Poirier as a guy who's going to fight into his 30s,
Yeah.
Like, I think these are the kinds of changes that he needs to make, because he's not a newcomer anymore. You know, he's had 18 fights in the UFC plus I think 3 in the WEC before that.
Yeah.
He's been fighting since 2009. He is in his late prime right now. So if he wants to extend that prime, you know, into the point where he's 32, 33, these are the kinds of things he needs to do. He needs to have fights where he doesn't take that much damage.
Yeah, and he talked about not sparring quite as much, like doing more technical work. Maybe what we're seeing, too, is just the difference. Because, again, I don't think he added a bunch of new techniques. He just got better at using them. So maybe what we're seeing is the difference between somebody who does only hard sparring and someone who does a much higher proportion of technical sparring and sort of play sparring and drills for their training. Because I think a lot of people think that like the best way to teach someone to box or to strike is to just throw them in there and have them get the shit beat out of them until it doesn't happen. Which to me is as wrong as like the sink or swim idea in swim lessons, right? Like if you throw someone in the deep end, I always say that they will probably learn, like if they survive, they will learn how not to drown, but that is not the same thing as learning to swim. You know, that is not, they're not going to learn how to do things perfectly. They're just going to learn to survive. And it looked a lot like that maybe was the response that Poirier had before. That he probably did a lot of hard sparring in the gym, a lot of wars. This is conjecture, but my assumption is that I know that was a bigger part of his training, and that he was like, oh, I get tagged, and then I scare this motherfucker off. That's my response. It's sink or swim. I have to survive. And now it's like he's still thinking when the fight gets crazy. And that's a big change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have always liked Poirier. Going back to to when he was a youthful newcomer, I've always liked his game a lot. I've always thought he had a ton of potential. And like, it's nice to see him blossoming. And just the way that his game has changed over the years, because I would say he's one of the first guys whose game I followed like as a technical development from the very beginning of it. You know, so it's been interesting as a case study to watch him develop in high profile spots too. Like he's had a lot of main card fights. He's fought a lot of real good dudes at 145 and 155 over the years. Like, and he's been a well-trained, adaptable fighter. Like he's a guy, it strikes me, who has always maximized his talent, you know, like he's a hardworking dude, has clearly thought about what he needs to change, about what he can add. And it's nice to see.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. So props to Dustin Poirier. He looked good in the fight, had a bit of trouble in the second round, but Eddie Alvarez is a goddamn warrior, and you hurt him, you have to goddamn watch yourself. Let's talk about then. Oh, I got choked up talking about Eddie Alvarez. I just love him so much. Let's talk about Jason Knight and Chaz Skelly. Jason Knight looked great, better than I expected. And surprisingly, for the first round of this fight, it was a little reversed who had the edge in which phase. I thought in the first round, Skelly landed the better shots on the feet, especially after they returned to their feet at the end. Jason Knight ran into about 3 really hard counters. But on the ground, Chaz Skelly didn't know what to do. He was completely tied up by a very tight high guard from Jason Knight. So that was not what I expected.
He knew what he wanted to do. He couldn't do it. He could not get himself to the kinds of scramble initiating positions that he favors.
Yeah. Our friend Tom Grant was talking about this on Twitter, but it was a little confusing that Skelly, he got Knight to the ground. Credit to Knight, by the way, for having a very effective high guard, also for throwing some of the meanest elbows I think I've ever seen from that position. He was really looking to just cave in the top of Chaz Skelly's skull with those elbows. But he had that high guard and was threatening the omoplata, and it looked like Skelly was feeding the omoplata, like waiting for the attack to come and then trying to scramble and pass. But he had opportunities not to play that after that game, after it didn't work the first few times. Like if I recall, when he got Knight down in the second round, or maybe it was near the end of the first, Knight ended up in a high half butterfly guard. So he had a high guard with one leg, and the other leg was just a butterfly hook. And Skelly could have pushed down on that knee and stepped over and evaded the omoplata threat altogether. But he didn't do it, and I'm not really sure why. he seemed so focused on like letting Knight attack submissions and scramble. And then maybe it was a nice adjustment from Knight to not be so aggressive, to like get a strong position and to use it as a point of control rather than letting Skelly scramble.
Yeah, I thought it was just a real smart performance from Knight all around. Like he strikes me as a born fighter. Oh, yeah. Like in the sense that he makes really, really good decisions under pressure. This is something that we've talked about a lot over the years that we've been doing this show together, is how there are some guys who really excel just at decision making under pressure. Yeah. Like John Jones is the best example of this ever, in terms of somebody who just always does the right things. Demetrius Johnson basically always makes the right decision from a menu of options when he's presented with them. Jason Knight, in a kind of a more basic sense, because we haven't seen his game really develop yet, I think Knight is the same way. I think Knight really, really tends to make good decisions when the chips are down. He makes the right decision about what position to attack, when to scramble, when to try to get back to his feet, when to shoot, when to throw what counter.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's been fighting technically since 2009, but he's only really been very active for the last couple of years, like the last 3 years. And so I think we are just now starting to see Knight get comfortable as a fighter. Did he even try to throw punches at Tatsuya Kawajiri in his UFC debut? Barely, right? I mean, he got taken down a lot, but he was also very, very willing to grapple in that fight. Yeah. And
because he was a grappler. Like if you watched him on the regional scene, if you watched him when he was fighting in Titan, when he submitted Musa Khamanaev, who's a pretty dang good top control grappler, Knight looked like a guard guy. He looked like that dude who fights in who's fought in Cage Warriors and Bama, Paddy Pimblett. That's who he reminded me of.
Sure.
When he was on the regional scene. But that's not who he is. Like all of a sudden in his next couple of fights, he showed off entirely different skills. He showed off his wrestling game. He showed off that kind of rugged, basic but pretty rugged and effective boxing game. Like this is a dude with real legit talent.
Yeah, I agree. I will say we've praised his decision making, and I agree. But he also did play guard with his head against the fence. Like, at some point, that's going to have to change, I think. But for sure. He played a more control-oriented guard, so at least it made it a less dangerous position, that he was just crushing down on Chaz Skelly's posture rather than like hoping to be able to move his hips.
For sure. Like I will say this though, and this may get me some heat, but I'm gonna stick with it. Jason Knight is a way more dangerous guard player than Yair Rodriguez is.
Ooh.
Way more dangerous.
He's been doing it for longer, I think. I mean, it's possible, yeah. Rodriguez doesn't actually have a ton of very impressive submissions from his guard.
Yeah, he can threaten you, but his has always struck me as a threatening guard rather than an actually dangerous guard. He uses the threat of submissions from his back much more than he uses the actual submissions themselves.
Which fits into our overall read of Yair Rodriguez, right? Like, it works better if you're scared of him. And if you're not, then it's not as effective. Whereas I don't think Skelly was scared of Knight's guard. Knight's guard just, for the most part, prevented Skelly from doing anything on the ground.
Yeah, Knight was convinced that he snapped Skelly's arm with an armbar attempt, which I think that's entirely possible. He had it deep. But at any rate, is that the last fight that we wanted to talk about, or did we want to? Did you want to talk about James Vick real quick?
I just want to say, I know people. This is like the end. We're winding down. Nobody wants to hear about James Vick, I guess. But goddamn it, he insisted that the UFC start promoting it, and I'm jumping on board with that. I want to say that James Vick. I am loath to say, when does James Vick get a step up in competition? Because the last time I did that, I was like, oh, he's fighting Beneil Dariush. And he got absolutely demolished by Beneil Dariush. But he is getting better, and specifically getting much better as a boxer in ways that I think a lot of people with Vick's frame or with a frame like his really struggle to do. I think that we talked on this episode about how being extremely athletic can make it really difficult for you to develop fundamentals because when you're fighting lesser guys, you don't feel like you need them. And so during your formative years as a fighter, you can rely on your gifts and not have to pay attention to the P's and Q's. And that is the case for tall guys, usually, as far as defense is concerned. Is that when against guys who are threatened by your reach, or who feel your jab and realize how far away you are and don't think they can get to you or whatever, or just aren't very good, against those guys, being tall is its own defense. It is like being very athletic. It's a gift that makes it really difficult for inexperienced fighters to get after you. So then you get to the higher level and you have guys who are preparing very specifically, like Marco Polo Reyes, to close the distance, to hit you with punches, to throw overhands over the top, and hit you with the kind of shots that work especially well against tall guys, and you're not ready for it. And James Vick had that problem earlier in his UFC career. Like this is a guy who was knocked down like 2 or 3 times by Nick Hine, who is not even that powerful of a puncher and is not that good of a boxer. Like has basically a left hand and not much else, and is quite athletic. But against Marco Polo Reyes, he had no problems outboxing him, and I do think that is impressive.
Yeah, and Reyes, pretty good boxer.
Yeah.
Pretty dang good boxer, actually. I mean, the thing that was really striking to me is Vic was really turning his hip into his punches. Mm-hmm. And so he was maximizing his reach, first of all, which matters a lot for him. But second, it also adds a lot of power because when he was catching Reyes, he was catching him right at the snappy part of the punch. Like the real power, especially in a straight punch, comes from about the last 20% of it. You want your fist to make contact when you're about 80% through the motion of the punch. The full motion of the punch. Any further than that, and you've missed some power. Any closer than that, and you haven't really gotten to the point where you're driving your hip through yet. So Vic was catching Reyes right at the snappy part, and that's not just about him turning his hip over. That's also about your sense of the distance, where you are relative to your opponent, and knowing when to throw the punch at what angle. Yeah. So it all speaks to A, good training, but B, lots more experience in terms of the kind of intangible aspects.
Yeah, and I think honestly, like that performance, I know Reyes is not a world beater, but that performance actually makes me think that Vic probably can beat some substantially better fighters and can hang with the better guys because he is still developing. And it's good to see, you know, it's nice to see somebody's game blossom like that. We may have a little lightweight / welterweight Vladimir Klitschko on our hands, somebody who hits pretty hard and is very, very long. And Vic's frame really is crazy for the lightweight division. One of these days, he's going to have to move up to 170. But for now, looking good, man, looking better than ever. And I enjoyed that. So that's our show. That's UFC 211, and I hope you enjoyed the show as much as we enjoyed the fights. And I hope that you can forgive me for being so bad with my predictions. Because, I mean, I might joke about it, but it was bad. It was like the worst run. I've had a pretty good year. And even after that, I'm still at 62% for the year, but that is bad. 3-9. So thank you so much for still sticking around and still seeing some value in the show other than just the brief picks that we do for each upcoming card. Next week, we're going to have a show about some of the most impressive fighters that are debuting in the UFC, and then we're going to cover Gustafsson versus Teixeira as a bonus episode because, frankly, the card is not that great. So we're going to give that a bonus because there are a fewer fights. There are fights that are highlights that you will enjoy hearing about if you're a patron, but not enough to really fill out an hour. So we're going to spend our time talking about guys like Justin Gaethje, Marlon Moraes. What's the Russian guy's name that I'm forgetting?
Zabit Magomed Sharipov, and we'll also talk a little Peter Yan, I believe.
Yeah. So we got some good stuff coming up that you'll want to listen to next week, and articles coming out as well. Pat, are you doing anything MMA related this week?
I am. I'm doing a piece for Deadspin on the inimitable Joanna Jedrzejczyk and why I think that she's the greatest female fighter of all time, and also why I think, frankly, that she's the best striker in the UFC. So that should be coming out, I think, Monday or Tuesday. I'm not sure exactly.
All right. And as for me, I've got a piece coming out also on Joanna Jedrzejczyk. I'm going to basically look at the strategy that she adopted to shut down the very threatening Jessica Andrade and to make a threatening, uniquely threatening fighter look like anything but. And I've got some other things in the work, but I won't promise anything right now because I'll be out of town this next week. So we'll just say that one and then keep your eyes peeled for next week's bonus episode. I'll give you an early notice on that. If you want to hear us talk about Gustafsson Teixeira, we're going to do that for our $3 patrons. Spend a little time breaking that one down. Other than that, we will see you guys next week when we talk about the new signees in the UFC, the ones that have us the most titillated. And if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.